Let's just be honest. This movie kind of sucks. Being the last movie in a series is always something that's really tough. There are so many things to wrap up and give a satisfying conclusion to, but that's not really where Mockingjay Part 2 struggles. In fact, weirdly, I would say it's like the one place that it actually succeeds. Before I tell you what saves this movie, we have to understand why the majority of this movie feels so bad. The most egregious reason for this has to be the entire middle section of the movie, and there's a couple of reasons why. In the first Hunger Games movie and in Catching Fire, we see the movies follow a similar plot structure. This is an oversimplification, but basically both movies work the same way. We start with plot and drama, and then the second section of the movie we get into the actual games. And then in the third section of the movie, we really get to see the repercussions of everything that happened in the game. The last two movies don't follow that structure because A, it's one story split into two parts, and B, we don't go to the Hunger Games again. Instead, we get the invasion of the Capitol, which the movie and the book try desperately to frame as the 76th Hunger Games.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 76th Hunger Games.
But that just really doesn't work. I think the idea was that by introducing all of these pods as kind of like a plot device and really emphasizing like every chance they get that these are created by the game makers, that we could have kind of a surrogate Hunger Games. But the problem is that when we actually get into the invasion of the Capitol, this just doesn't feel like the Hunger Games at all. When I think of the Hunger Games, I think of this.
You want mine too?
No, that's okay.
Here.
And this. And even this.
What about you?
Nobody needs me.
I do.
What I don't think of is Katniss and her friends fighting the monsters from I Am Legend. I see the logic behind these decisions. It already feels a little bit contrived that Katniss ends up in the Hunger Games again in Catching Fire, so we can't just do that same idea. Plus, how would that end up in any sort of wrapping up or conclusion for anything that's going on in the series? But if you're going to do the Hunger Games again, but symbolically, you have to actually make it seem like the Hunger Games. There's no cornucopia, there's no wilderness survival aspect, and there's no idea that they're entering the games with nothing but their wits and their skills to survive. But most importantly, they're missing the whole idea that makes the Hunger Games interesting, which is that only one person is going to leave alive. That's kind of what made the Hunger Games interesting in the first place. This constant tension that we are seeing these participants grow closer and help each other and get to know each other better while knowing in the back of our heads that they might have to kill each other later. Also, and I know this might seem like a small thing, but for me it created a ton of dissonance. The Hunger Games as a series is not a series where I think of guns as being a big part of the weaponry that's used. I think partially this is because Katniss's whole thing is being good with a bow, but the fact that we literally watch her load a magazine in this movie feels super weird and out of place. Also, watching Gale just shoot these mutts with a pistol feels so weird to me. It's just another thing that makes me feel like we're watching the YA version of Saving Private Ryan all of a sudden.
He was on the ground before we heard the shot.
This kind of turns into a war movie out of nowhere, and it's just not something that feels cohesive with the rest of the movies. And while I think this wasn't the best choice for the story, I think that if there was a good enough reason for all of this to be happening, then, we could kind of hand wave some of that stuff away a little bit more easily. But the unfortunate thing is that there really isn't a good reason for any of this stuff to be happening anyways. Even though these action sections are, I think, what actually makes the movie feel so out of place in the rest of the series, it's not actually the part of this whole section that bothers me the most. The thing that actually bothers me the most is what really kicks all of this off, which is Katniss lying to everyone after Boggs has died. Now, there's a few reasons why I think her lying here is so weird and bothers me so much. Firstly, in Mockingjay Part 1, the whole arc of Katniss's character growth is her learning how to deal with feeling helpless, see my last video about that movie. So to have her make the decision to put all of these people's lives at stake just so that she can get vengeance or feel like she has some kind of agency feels like a big step back for her character. I know that people aren't perfect, and as humans, we oftentimes have to learn the same lesson more than once for it to really sink in, but this is still just a really frustrating decision as an audience member for Katniss to make. Also, the lie was totally unnecessary anyways because they didn't even believe her. So she had no reason to lie in the first place and could have just been honest. It feels like it would have been much more heroic of her to just have the difficult conversation in the first place with all of these people who are relying on her. But instead, she just lies straight to their faces, and then they back her up anyways. And then at this awkward scene later in the movie, we find out that none of them kind of believed her anyways, and so she could have just been honest because they didn't buy her story.
I made it up. All of it. There is no special mission from Coin. There's only my plan. Everyone that's dead is dead because of me. I lied. We know, we all knew.
And not only that, but all of this, at the end of the day, was pointless. When Katniss and the remaining people alive through the invasion of the capital finally get to Snow's mansion, they don't do anything. They show up and watch as Coin and the rebels win almost completely without their help. Katniss and her party do basically nothing and are literally unnecessary to this victory. So that means that Finnick, Castor, Pollux, and 4 soldiers from their squad besides those end up dying for basically no reason, except because Katniss wants a shot at Snow, and she ends up getting that later anyways. After finishing this movie and reflecting on this section of what is honestly like a big chunk of this final movie, and also a pretty big section of the book, I'm left with the feeling that Katniss did all of this, and all that came out of it was a bunch of people getting killed for no reason, and it was her fault. Including Finnick, who arguably had the most reason to live and the biggest turnaround in his life, and had been through the most stuff out of all of them since his victory. But instead of living out his newly married life and getting to see his child raised, he died to a bunch of mutts so that I guess Katniss could watch a bunch of children and her sister die. Like I said, there's a lot wrong with this movie, and there are a lot of reasons that I think people don't like it, including myself. But genuinely, I think that there is one saving grace to this movie that is good enough, for me at least, to help me overlook a lot of the bad storytelling decisions made in Act 2. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, final parts of a series usually struggle because they have so many things to wrap up, and it's difficult to wrap up that many things successfully in a way that feels like it really gives the audience closure in all of the ways that we expect a story to. Which is why this movie is so weird, because it does that part really well. It's just everything else that it struggles with. After the whole war sequence is over, we're in what initially feels like an epilogue. Everything has kind of been solved, at least at the societal level, and the world feels like it's now going to be in a better place. But then we get 2 scenes that change our entire perspective on what is happening and make us question if everything really is going to get better. The first of those scenes, and probably one of, if not my favorite scene in the entire series, is this scene between former President Snow and Katniss.
That's a nice one. The colors are lovely, of course. But nothing says perfection like white. I was hoping you'd find your way here. There are so many things we should discuss. But I have a feeling your visit will be brief, so first things first.
In this scene, Snow tells us that he didn't drop the bombs that ended up killing Prim and all those children. He tells Katniss that Coin did that. It wasn't necessary, but it was an ingenious way to make herself look good and remove any remaining resistance from the Peacekeepers or the Capitol. I love this decision for the story. We have no good reason to trust Snow. He has been the primary antagonist throughout the entire series so far, and we also know that he is an awful person who will not stop at anything to keep power for himself. But what he says also kind of starts to make sense.
You really think I gave the order? We both know I'm not above killing children, but I'm not wasteful. I take life for specific reasons, and there was no reason for me to destroy a pen full of capital children.
They cut out one of his lines from the movie that I always thought was one of the strongest reasons for Katniss to believe him, which is he's asking Katniss why, if he had a ship to drop bombs with, he wouldn't just use it to fly away and escape and start planning his comeback. But even considering his strong points, it still initially just feels like we're being manipulated. It feels like Snow is making some kind of desperate last attempt to turn Katniss back to his side so that he can either escape or to put in place some other kind of contingency. This conversation is also so fascinating because it gives us some insight into Snow's mind and how he thinks. Like, for example, him talking to Katniss about how she knows that he's not above killing children, but that one thing he is not is wasteful. I think this line rings really true, and it doesn't make Snow a better person at all, but it does give us kind of an additional insight into the way that he thinks about running Panem, and also what is necessary to keep the peace, at least the way that he has been doing it. But also, the one thing that I kind of wish was different about this scene, that really has nothing to do with this scene, is I wish we hadn't seen Snow so much up to this point. I've criticized the movies quite a bit in my other videos about it for showing Snow so much in the movies, because I like him better as kind of this figure behind the scenes, like Wizard of Oz style. He's kind of behind the curtain a lot more in the books. It makes this conversation in the books a lot more striking, because I think this is literally like the second or third time Katniss has ever talked to Snow, and he's kind of dropping some big bombs, and he also is just weirdly casual about everything, and it makes this whole conversation a lot more haunting when we haven't seen as much of him. Either way, though, we have a hard time believing Snow until the next day when Coin calls all the victors in. We get the news that she has made herself the interim president and hasn't set any kind of timeline on when the actual election will take place, which is already raising some pretty big red flags all over the place. She legitimately might have gotten away with that, though, if that's all she had said, but then she goes a step too far.
In lieu of these barbaric executions, we hold a symbolic Hunger Games.
You want to have another Hunger Games with the Capitol's children?
This makes Coin's real intentions very clear very quickly. It illuminates for us and Katniss that Coin wasn't necessarily against the Hunger Games, and she might even see why they were necessary, and this makes Coin not really any different than Snow. She has the fundamental belief, like Snow does, that society wants bloodshed, and if that need isn't met, then it will fall apart. Which is the exact kind of thinking that got them into the situation with the Hunger Games in the first place. In fact, it even sounds scarily close to the origin story for the initial Hunger Games, just with the tables turned. So when they start to vote, we're surprised when Katniss does the exact opposite of what we would expect her to do and votes in favor of Coin's symbolic Hunger Game. But equally as important, Haymitch also, after seeing how Katniss votes in favor of the new Hunger Games. This is not something that either of these characters would typically do, and we as the audience are left wondering what is going on and if Katniss has really let her desire for revenge overtake her morals. But on the day that Katniss is supposed to kill Snow, her one condition for supporting Coin's Hunger Games, we see why she actually agreed. Because at that moment when Coin suggested that, Katniss realized that Coin had to be done away with, because or else Panem might find itself in the hands of a possibly even more nefarious dictator. The only way to avoid that happening was to get Coin to trust her and then take her only opportunity to take Coin out of the picture. This finale does so much heavy lifting for the end of this story. It doesn't make me like anything that I didn't like before, and it doesn't change the context of the other bad storytelling decisions enough to really sway my opinion on them. But what it does do is give us this thematically fulfilling ending that turns Katniss back into a hero. Even more than that, it doesn't do what I think too many YA stories, especially dystopian ones, do, which is give us this weirdly happy ending where everything is just hunky-dory all of a sudden. Yes, Plutarch is going to be a better choice as an interim president, and they're actually going to have a real democratic election to elect someone after that. Those are really good positive things that come out of everything that all of the protagonists have been working towards. But even ignoring all of the friends that have died along the way, Katniss is pretty messed up after this. She's basically relegated to District 12, and yes, her and Peeta end up together, but to me, it doesn't feel like the happy, romantic ending for them that we might have wanted. Even in the actual epilogue, where we see them playing with their kids, Katniss says something really haunting to her infant child.
Oh, shh. Did you have a nightmare? I have nightmares too.
Someday I'll explain it to you. Why they came. Why they won't ever go away.
The Hunger Games isn't a happy story, and it isn't really meant to be. It has its flaws, especially this final installment of the series, but in the end, it sticks to its message. Bad things will happen. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary, but at the end of the day, life goes on, and you have to find a way to live with yourself at the end of all of it. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. It's always greatly appreciated. If you've watched the channel before, you might have noticed that the logo and the name are a little bit different. This channel was initially created to talk about books, but as I've found my own creative voice more, I feel like I want to talk about stories of all kinds, including movies and maybe even eventually games. The new channel name, logo, and content is kind of meant to reflect that, and if there's any particular story you'd like me to look at, feel free to leave one down in the comments, as well as your inevitable comments either correcting me or, if you're in a good mood, maybe even agreeing with me. Also, as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, subscribe, go check out my channel. There will also be a recommended video at the end of this that the algorithm thinks you would like, and it really shows the algorithm that you like my content if you go watch something else that I made right after this. More content coming soon, and again, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you guys in the next one.
The Penfield Mood Organ, named after the real-life neurosurgeon and researcher Wilder Penfield, is a device that allows neural stimulation to cause different emotions. For example, a user could dial